Welcome to the Cloud Accounting Podcast, a show for accountants using technology to make their jobs more strategic and impactful. I'm Blake Oliver.
And I'm David Leary.
So David, what's new this week?
Preparing for scaling new heights next week. So traveling again, right? It seems like it's always traveling all the time. Are you doing any traveling this week or next week?
Yes. On Sunday, I'm taking a red eye to Indianapolis for the IMA conference, ACE, right. I believe it's called. And then the next day, I'm going to be in Minneapolis at the Minnesota CPA Society conference, and I'm giving the same presentation at both, thankfully.
Is it your what you learned from the conductor presentation?
No. This one is technology trends that accountants and controllers need to know.
Oh, got it.
Yeah. So automation, artificial intelligence, blockchain, remote work, all that good stuff. Cloud accounting.
Got it. Great. So I know that we're both kind of in a hurry today. We have meetings and that they're going to shut us off here soon. So we should just jump into the news, right?
Let's do it.
All right. I have an article from a couple weeks. Remember a couple weeks ago when you had to file your taxes and all the IRS computers were down?
Yes.
Okay. Good news. So the IRS has budgeted $291 million on technology for the tax reform.
Hallelujah.
And it's divvied up a lot of ways. So this is an article on Accounting Today. Obviously, we'll have the link for it. So they're going to spend some portion of this money on updating 140 of its computer systems. So some of these are due to the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act, though. So there's general upgrades happening. I think the other interesting thing with this article, which I did not know, that I think was a really interesting bullet, that the IRS holds 1,000 outreach events a year to educate taxpayers and tax professionals. So part of this money is budgeted to educate all of us, probably all the listeners of this podcast, as well as small business owners themselves. But I had no idea that they do basically 1,000 events a year. The IRS does.
Yeah, I didn't know you could even talk to them at this point. I mean, try to call them on the phone. It's a lost cause, right? I mean, you have to stay on hold for hours and hours and hours. So that's good news. It's great. Let's get them out there talking to people, educating people.
I guess if anybody's listening and they have a link to one of these magical events, one of these 1,000 events, please send us the link so we can click through and maybe go ourselves, maybe.
Well, I would love to hear what it's like, or even see it myself. Well, hey, so David, I have some cool news from FloQast this week. We had a bunch going on, and I'd love to share that with you.
Yeah.
So here in LA, we had our Cloud Accounting Roundtable for controllers and CFOs yesterday. So we invited 3 different accountants from 3 different companies based in LA, high growth companies. We did this in conjunction with one of our new partners, Tactical Cloud. And we got 40 accountants together in a room to hear what are the benefits and challenges of moving to cloud. Now, some of our listeners will probably be thinking, this is old news. I moved to the cloud years ago. Well, the reason we have these events is because still only about half of companies, actually fewer than half of companies overall, are on a cloud accounting system. They may be using cloud applications. That's about 80%, but integrations, getting everything on the cloud, still very small minority that are doing that. So we had this event. And a ton of takeaways, but the one that I thought was really interesting was that all 3 of these companies were mid-sized companies growing quickly that had recently moved from QuickBooks to an ERP system to support their growth. And all 3 of them had either really, really difficult or failed implementations the first time. It did not go well, and they had to re-implement later, and it took months and months and months to do that.
So they weren't moving to cloud. They were actually jumping to a huge, expensive ERP system at the same time. It was like two jumps.
Exactly. Yeah. So going from like QuickBooks Desktop to an ERP system, which, as a startup, if you want to raise a Series B round of, funding, like you got to get to that level. And very, very difficult, especially when you don't have processes in place. That was another takeaway, is that a lot of these companies were not only trying to migrate systems, they were trying to come up with their process at the same time, which is very, very difficult and was probably part of the reason their implementations were so difficult, because they didn't really know what they were implementing. So I think one of the lessons is get your process in place and then move to the cloud. Take 2 steps.
That makes sense. I think I've seen that as I've tried to work with a VA to do some work for me. And so I had to try to document the process, but really documenting the process allowed me to automate it. right? And so, yeah, you're right. Like if you document all your process, you could swap out tool A for tool B if your processes are tight. You're right. That's a very good benefit or takeaway.
Yeah, and the reason it's so important to know what your process is that unlike in, say, Xero or QBO, where there is pretty much one way to do something most of the time, in these ERP systems, they're super complex and customizable, and there might be like 4 or 5 different ways. And when you're getting implemented, the people doing the implementation will probably just ask you, like, how do you want to do it? Here's the options. And they aren't necessarily qualified to give you that advice. So that was actually another one of the takeaways was find an implementation partner that can actually consult with you on your process. They need to be accountants doing the implementation. Otherwise, you're really on your own and you might make some decisions that you regret later and are very, very difficult to undo.
No, it's funny. So you had this discussion at the roundtable of accountants, right?
Yes.
2 nights ago, I had a similar discussion, but I went to a dinner of backhoe operators. So it's a bunch of small business owners that own backhoe companies, right?
That is very niche.
And a friend of mine invited me to do it, so I went to speak, and I was just kind of telling them about our space, right? And where small business is headed when it comes to accounting technology and cloud. And it's really funny of like all the discussions we have with accountants and like how hard it is to convince accountants that like, hey, the cloud's good, automating your process is good, you should stop doing data entry. I was able to convince a room of backhoe operators in like 20 seconds. It was so easy. I'm just like, remember 1939 when you dug every hole with a shovel? And then the backhoe was invented in 1941? Right? Like, I can't pay any single person in that room to dig a hole with a shovel, right? Except
what
for
a great analogy,
right? And so, except for one, but then when I started talking about like their workflows and their business, right? They got it. They're like, oh, I see why I should not use paper timesheets and I should use a timesheet app because that's just like not using a backhoe. Right?
Exactly.
To dig a hole. And they really just got it. It was kind of amazing. The greatest quote, though, I think, is somebody was saying, I'll dig the hole with the shovel, but I'm going to charge you per hour. Right? And not charge you the value I'm bringing you. And it's like, it's amazing. Like these guys, these backhoe operators understand the whole value conversation and not doing billable hour. It's like, I was like, God, this is amazing. They're miles ahead of us.
So are they billing fixed fees and that sort of thing?
Yeah. Like if you need a swimming pool dug, they're going to charge you some X amount, possibly based on the size of the hole, but it's not going to be how many hours it takes them.
Well, maybe accountants should be thinking more like backhoe operators, right? Figure out what the size of the hole is that you need to dig before you start digging.
Yeah.
I think a lot of the time we don't do that, right? We just say, oh, you need a hole dug? Yeah, we'll start digging. And then there's really no scope.
Yeah. Maybe there's a whole talk we could do on this now. We'll relate the backhoe operators back to the accounting industry.
You've got to do that, David. I love it.
So this survey or this, I'm sorry, I don't want to say survey. So you had this roundtable and the roundtable led to a survey. Is that correct? Or
so it's just a coincidence that we happen to have our cloud accounting survey get released the same week as this roundtable. It's really good timing. So the story is that FloQast back in March, we started doing a survey of accounting and finance professionals specifically around cloud accounting. So we hired a professional research firm called Dimensional Research, and they went out and worked with us on crafting the questions. So they went out to 506 accounting professionals who responded. We surveyed, tens of thousands of people. We got 500 people who gave us their time, who responded to the survey, and we asked them a ton of questions about accounting, and we got some really cool results. Some of it which confirms what a lot of us in the cloud accounting world already knew, but we had really not confirmed empirically with data. And some of it was actually really surprising. So if you're up for it, David, I'll share with you some of the results.
Perfect.
So one of the results is that, and then this kind of shocked me, is how overwhelmingly positive accountants are about technology. I think there's this view of accountants as being, guys with the green eye shades, just want to do spreadsheets, don't want to be innovative. That is actually not at all what our survey showed. 99.7% of respondents said that technology is having a positive impact on the accounting profession. 99.7%. I mean, that's everybody, right?
Okay. Yeah.
Maybe one guy who said no. And 99% expect that technology will change their job in the next 10 years. 89% say technology changes are good for their career. And 81% are saying that technology, data, and system skills are much more important than they were 10 years ago. So overwhelmingly positive, are seeing that it's important to get on top of this technology and learn it, which I thought was really cool. Like it's no longer this small minority, right? And I don't think it ever has been. I think that's a misunderstanding. Accountants have actually always been innovative. We were the first business professionals to adopt the personal computer because of the spreadsheet, which was the first killer application. So in a lot of ways, we led the computer revolution. It's just been that cloud has not quite gotten there to accounting as quickly as it did to like sales or marketing in this particular case. But now that we're catching up, I think you're going to see accountants and finance people leading the way in terms of seeing those gigantic productivity increases and benefits to the strategy of the business due to all this information we're now getting in our cloud systems.
No, that makes sense. Yeah, it's really good. I think if anybody wants it, I think you have a blog post to link to, they can download it and see this. There's a lot of great stuff in there. The one takeaway for me, and it's funny because it ties to an article I have, is the sentence is like, the cloud accountants are leading the way of the future. And it's like they are most likely to have changed the way they evaluate and hire talent.
Yes.
So one of the articles I have this week is actually from the legal industry. And essentially the argument is, this is from biglawbusiness.com, and the title of the article is really straightforward. It's just the billable hour makes no sense in an AI world, right? And the gist of this article is a lot of stuff we've talked about in the accounting space as well, but it's really where they're having to hire differently.
So you're saying this is an article from the legal profession about how the billable hour is no longer working for them?
Exactly. As they move forward with automation and AI. So they're on the same journey, us as the accounting industry is. They might be a little bit behind, but they actually talk about how they're going to have to hire differently.
I worked with lawyers in really two major instances. One, when I started my business, I started my own accounting firm, and two, when I sold it. And in particular, when I sold it, I liked my attorney, but I had a very negative experience when it came to the billings because it ended up costing about twice as much as she estimated through not necessarily any fault of her own, but it gave me a really bad taste for legal work. And in retrospect, I wish I'd demanded a fixed fee. And I think there could have been a way to incentivize our attorneys to be more efficient. I think the problem was that we had attorneys on both sides of the transaction, and they had no incentive to be efficient with their time because they were getting paid hourly. So they'd get on conference calls and just, in my opinion, waste time talking about stuff that was not critical to the deal.
Yeah.
I mean, they're being thorough, they're attorneys, right? But we need to align the incentives, right? I wanted to get the deal done for a lot less, and it didn't work out that way. So I think there's a huge opportunity for law firms serving small business owners in particular to figure out how to do fixed fees, because I would absolutely go with a firm that did fixed fees over one that didn't, if all things else were equal.
Yeah. And some of that's bar associations. I've kind of have some insider knowledge of this more than I probably should, but it's super, super complicated. I know like the app Clio, those guys are trying to revolutionize all of that. So it's pretty complicated. But this article, the thing, this kind of goes to what you're saying. Basically, the quote is, clients are not going to pay for time. Instead, they're going to be willing to pay for a lawyer's judgment, empathy, creativity, adaptability, and emotional intelligence. Right? Like that's what they want. And you could really apply that to accounting in the hiring type situation, right? You want an accountant or bookkeeper that can apply judgment, is creative, can adapt, right? You don't want just to pay somebody to type stuff into a computer. So it's a good article, and it has a lot of overlaps to our space.
Yep. I would absolutely agree with that. And if the lawyers are getting on board with ditching the billable hour, then that's when as an accountant, it's really time to get moving on that. Speaking of the talent issue and hiring and all that stuff, there's one more takeaway from the survey that I wanted to highlight.
Oh, yeah.
We talked about how accountants are overwhelmingly positive about technology. Well, there's another interplay with technology and hiring and retaining talent that I wasn't really thinking about, which is that we all know there's a talent crunch in the accounting world. There's not enough CPAs to go around. And it looks like as the baby boomers retire, that's just going to get to be more and more of a problem. And what we found in our survey is that the number one thing that firms are doing to attract and retain top talent is implement modern technology. 53% of respondents said that their firms were doing that. And that's more than any other thing they were doing. The second thing, 49%, was enable remote work. And way down, like in the 20 percentile, was increasing salaries. So I think that trying to make a better experience for the employees by implementing modern technology and allowing them to work remotely, at least part of the time, is a big priority for firms, because they'd much rather do that than dramatically increase salaries, which is much more expensive than doing any of this technology stuff.
Yeah, that makes sense. It's a bang for the buck, because the cost effectiveness of letting people work remote, the cost effectiveness, the bang for the buck you get from technology, you're basically getting free recruiting. Like, it's a ripple effect versus firms spend money on recruiting and advertising. Come work for us. We're such a great firm. Like, if you just do these two things, you're going to get a ripple. And that's, I think, a good lesson.
Yeah. And I just read another article. I'll try to find it and put it in the show notes. I think it was in the Wall Street Journal. A survey of just businesses in general, or employees in general, found that over 50% of them view modern technology as a critical element in making a decision as to whether or not they're going to accept a job offer. Do I get to use the computer of my choice? Do I get to use the software that I want to use, that I prefer? I think more and more firms are going to start offering people the choice. Like, I like using Macs, which is unusual for an accountant. I would have a hard time going to any company where I now have to go use a PC, and vice versa, right? It might be the other way around. I think employers are going to have to work with their IT departments to figure out how to deal with employee requests.
Yeah, that's interesting. I've always felt that. I've always had that relationship with our IT department, even in Intuit. Like, I grew up working construction. My father was in construction, and you brought your own hammer. You brought your hammer to the job. You brought your saw to the job, right? You don't just use the hammer they make you use, right? And I feel like the computer is your tools, like, in the way you configure Windows and the way you set up, the way you operate on your computer, that's your tool. And so to try and standardize that seems a little crazy to me, like the set of tools people use.
That's great. I had never thought of it from that standpoint of the construction industry, but that's, in the trades, that's absolutely the case. Is your employer will allow you to use the tools that you like, and the reason they do that is because it makes you more productive. Yep. So we should do the same thing in the what do we call this? The desk bound professions.
The desk bound.
The cubicle world.
Everybody that's hunched over, the hunched over professions. Yes.
Exactly. Well, David, I think that's all the time we've got today, because we both have to get to our Friday meetings and then get out of the office and go enjoy the weekend. So it was great talking to you as usual. I'm looking forward to doing this again soon.
Yeah, I guess next week I'll still be in Atlanta. Will you be some other part of the country?
Well, I'll be back in LA by then. So okay. Looking forward to chatting with you. And for our listeners who are interested in offering input on the show, sending articles our way, just connecting with us online, where's the best place for them to reach you, David?
So I'm on Twitter at David Leary. No space, just David Leary.
And I am also on Twitter at Blake T. Oliver. And you can hunt me down on LinkedIn. There aren't too many Blake Olivers. So if you just type Blake Oliver, Cloud Accountant, I will pop right up. And I love hearing from everybody.
But you have to put the T in. I feel like I can't find you if I don't put the T. It's much easier.
Really? Yeah, T for Thomas. That's my middle name.
Now the secret's out. All right. We'll know who listened to the end of the episode, because they're gonna, be able to post about Thomas.
Right. All those thousands and thousands of listeners will now know.
It's perfect. Hey, on that note, we'll talk next week. Bye, everybody.
Take care, David. Bye.
Bye.